It was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. A cataclysm that has haunted our collective memory for centuries. A deadly invisible killer swept across continents in the mid-14th century, leaving behind a world reshaped by grief and terror. It moved with terrifying speed, leaving millions of corpses, shattered families, and societies on the brink of collapse. Known as the Great Mortality, the Great Pestilence, and most enduringly, the Black Death, this mysterious plague killed an estimated 50 to 60% of Europe's population between 1347 and 1353. For over 600 years, scholars, scientists, and historians have been gripped by a single haunting question. Where did it all begin? What was the original spark that ignited this world-altering inferno? The answer remained one of history's greatest and most chilling mysteries. And now, thanks to the convergence of 19th-century archaeology, modern DNA science, and the work of a few determined researchers, we finally have an answer. The story does not begin in the plague pits of London or the panicked ports of Italy. It starts with a simple slab of stone in the mountains of Central Asia, etched with a single, chilling word: pestilence. In the summer of 1886, a team of Russian archaeologists was conducting excavations at two small cemeteries near the village of Karadzhigach, close to the northern shores of Lake Issyk Kul in what is now Kyrgyzstan. They unearthed the graves of a local Nestorian Christian trading community, a settlement that thrived along the bustling Silk Road. Among the hundreds of tombstones, a startling pattern emerged. A significant number of burials were clustered within a remarkably short period. From 1338 to 1339, nearly a full decade before the plague was first recorded in Europe. Even more ominously, several of these tombstones bore inscriptions explicitly stating the cause of death. The word carved in the Syriac script was unmistakable: pestilence. The human remains from these graves, representing a sudden and catastrophic die-off, were carefully collected and shipped to a museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. There, packed away in crates and boxes, they were catalogued and then for more than a century, largely forgotten, their silent testimony to a localized tragedy waiting to be heard. For over 600 years, the question of the Black Death's origin lingered, a ghost in the halls of history. Then, in the 21st century, a historian named Philip Slavin stumbled upon the old excavation notes from the Karadzhigach site. He was struck by the sheer number of deaths recorded in such a brief window. Out of 467 burials with precise dates, an astonishing 118 occurred in just 2 years, 1338 and 1339. This was not a normal mortality rate. It was a demographic catastrophe. The explicit mention of pestilence on the tombstones was the final tantalizing piece of the puzzle. Slavin began to suspect that this remote mountain community was not just another victim of the plague, but something far more significant. He hypothesized that this wasn't merely a plague outbreak. This could be the outbreak, the very source point from which the Great Mortality spilled out into the world. But proving such a monumental claim required more than old records and a strong suspicion. It demanded a kind of evidence that the 19th century archaeologists could never have dreamed of. The quest for definitive proof led Slavin to a groundbreaking collaboration with a team of paleogeneticists at Germany's prestigious Max Planck Institute, which is led by Johannes Krause. The plan was audacious: to extract and sequence DNA from the skeletons that had been lying in storage for over a century. The team focused on the teeth of 7 individuals buried in the Karadzhigach cemetery. Teeth are a biological time capsule, their hard enamel protecting the soft pulp within, which can preserve ancient DNA, including the genetic codes of pathogens that infected the person in life. The scientists painstakingly drilled into the teeth, extracted the genetic material, and began the complex process of sequencing. The results were electrifying. In 3 of the 7 individuals, they found it: the unmistakable genetic signature of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. But this was only the beginning. By sequencing the pathogen's full genome, they made a discovery that would rewrite history. The analysis revealed 2 critical facts. First, the strain of Yersinia pestis found in the 1338 Kyrgyzstan skeletons was the direct ancestor, the mother strain, of all the plague variants that would later devastate Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Its genetic code sat at the very base of the plague's family tree, at a point scientists call the Big Bang of plague diversification. A moment in time when this single strain exploded into 4 major lineages that spread across the globe. This was not just a related branch. It was the trunk from which all the deadly branches of the Black Death grew. The Kyrgyz strain predated every known sample of the Black Death found in European plague pits, confirming that the disease had originated here and traveled west, not the other way around. The evidence was now irrefutable, etched into the very building blocks of life and death. With this genetic confirmation, the long-disputed ground zero of the Black Death was finally pinpointed. The origin of the deadliest pandemic in European history was not a mystery shrouded in the mists of time, but a specific event in a specific place, the region around Lake Issyk Kul, Kyrgyzstan, in the years 1338 to 1339. The local community's tombstones had told the truth all along. But this answered the where and when. A new question now arose: how? How did this ancient and deadly bacterium make the catastrophic leap from its animal hosts into the human population, sparking a global pandemic? The answer lies in the unique ecology of the Tian Shan Mountains surrounding the lake. This region is a natural plague reservoir, a place where Yersinia pestis circulates endemically within local rodent populations, particularly marmots, but also gerbils and voles. For centuries, the plague likely remained contained within these animal communities. So what changed? Scientists believe a key trigger may have been a significant climatic fluctuation around that time, which could have caused the local rodent populations to boom and expand their territories, bringing them into closer and more frequent contact with humans and their livestock. The final fatal step was the zoonotic spillover. This occurs when a pathogen jumps from an animal to a human. Fleas that fed on infected rodents, now teeming with the plague bacteria, simply had to find a new host. It could have been a hunter who trapped a marmot for its fur, a valuable commodity on the Silk Road, or a family that butchered one for food. Once the first human was infected, the bacteria found a new, highly mobile, and immunologically naive host population, ready to be exploited. The initial spark had been lit. From this isolated mountain community, the plague began its inexorable march westward. The village of Karajigach was not just a quiet settlement. It was a node on the most important trade network of the ancient world, the Silk Road. Every day, caravans laden with silks, spices, and other precious goods passed through, creating a constant flow of people, animals, and unknowingly, pathogens. Infected black rats, common stowaways on these caravans, and the fleas they carried became the perfect vectors for the disease. As traders and travelers moved from one settlement to the next, they carried the invisible killer with them. Over the next few years, the plague traveled an astonishing 3,500 kilometers across Asia, creeping steadily toward the bustling port cities of the Black Sea. In 1346, the plague arrived at the gates of Kaffa, a fortified Genoese trading city on the Crimean Peninsula. At the time, Kaffa was under siege by the Mongol army of the Golden Horde. As the plague began to ravage the besieging army, their leader, Johnny Bag, made a desperate and terrifying decision. In what is considered one of the earliest examples of biological warfare in history, he ordered his men to use their catapults to hurl the plague-infected corpses of their own dead soldiers over the city walls. Panic erupted within Kaffa as the gruesome projectiles brought the disease directly into the besieged population. Desperate to escape, Genoese merchants boarded their ships and fled the city, setting sail for the relative safety of Europe. But they were not alone. The plague was on board with them, hidden in the blood of infected sailors and the fur of the rats scurrying in the ship's holds. When these ships docked in Sicily and Marseille in 1347, they unleashed a biological firestorm upon a continent utterly unprepared for what was coming. Medieval European cities were a perfect breeding ground for an epidemic. They were notoriously overcrowded, with families crammed into small, poorly ventilated houses. Sanitation was virtually non-existent. Streets were filled with animal waste, garbage, and human excrement, creating an ideal environment for the proliferation of black rats. With a massive, hungry rat population living in close proximity to humans, the plague-carrying fleas had an endless supply of hosts. The disease exploded, spreading from person to person through flea bites and, in its even more deadly form, through airborne droplets from coughing. The Great Mortality had begun its devastating sweep across Europe, a tide of death that had traveled thousands of miles from a small community in the mountains of Central Asia. In the end, it was a forgotten cemetery in Kyrgyzstan, a set of crumbling tombstones, and the microscopic traces of DNA locked inside ancient teeth that solved one of history's greatest mysteries. The combined power of historical inquiry and modern genetic science finally peeled back the layers of legend and uncertainty to reveal the true origin of the Black Death. A localized outbreak in a Silk Road trading hub, triggered by a chance encounter between humans and infected wildlife, set in motion a chain of events that would redraw the map of the world and leave an indelible scar on the human psyche. The story of the Black Death is a chilling reminder of how interconnected our world has always been, and how a single spark in a remote corner of the globe can ignite a fire that consumes continents. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to support us.